Happy Wednesday, everyone. We have reached the last, but in no way the least. In fact, maybe we've saved the best for last of our COVID era webinar Wednesdays. We're going to take a break to kind of regroup and come up with more programming for the month of July. We are not going to be out of touch. Emails will continue to go out. And if you're not on our contact list yet, just shoot an email to info@washingtonwalks.com and we'll get you on there. That way you'll be able to find out what we've got in store when we come back with more online experiences, probably in August. And that's going to take us through the end of the calendar year. We'll be pushing out fun content on our social media channels as well. Of course, if you really miss these webinars, you can go to our website, washingtonwalks.com, and you can rewatch the ones that we've already given or ones that you may have missed. I am delighted today to welcome my colleague, Garrett Peck, to do a webinar about, hi Garrett, about someone I never heard of. And you know what? That is the great thing about knowing Garrett Peck, because if you know Garrett Peck, I mean, I get to know him, but you all could know him through books that he's written, through tours, walking tours that he gives, for presentations he gives to organizations like the Smithsonian Associates on Politics and Prose. And when you connect with Garrett, you get to go to so many cool places that relate to Washington, D.C. You get to go to a place like the Seneca Quarry in Maryland. You get to go through downtown and find out about where Walt Whitman's sites are located, where there are sites that relate to Prohibition. You get to learn about World War I. And today, we're going to get to learn about beer and brewing, which I think, Garrett, is a subject and a food product near and dear to your heart. Am I correct?
Quite, yeah, since I was 16. When I went to Germany as an exchange student. So.
Right. Well, depending on your age, you know, where I grew up, the drinking age was 18, which came in handy as a high school student. But.
Yeah. And I got grandfathered into DC when I was going to college. I came through DC and I was like, oh, I can still have beer and wine, because that was right at the time when they shifted the age up. So I barely made it. So.
When did you arrive in the metro area?
I went to school in Virginia in 1986, and then did the Army afterwards, and came back here for grad school in 1994.
And you've been here ever
since then. So yeah.
My gosh, I never knew that. That's when I got to DC too.
Wow, cool.
Oh.
And we've planted our roots now. So.
We have planted our roots.
Yeah.
Well, Garrett, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay.
I'm going to let you share your screen.
Fantastic.
And I'm really curious to know why I might be young Andrew Wales living in Scotland, and I decide I'm going to leave.
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, and hopefully we'll get a good answer for that today. I wrote a book a couple years ago, actually 6 years ago, called Capital Beer, A Handy History of Brewing in Washington, D.C., and that was really what led to this impetus. And actually had like a 4-month period before the book came out, when I had a whole bunch of other little research projects. So I wanted to get more background on, and particularly about the very first commercial brewer in the Washington, D.C. area, which was Andrew Wales, who was born and raised in Edinburgh. And then I came over to Virginia in 1765 and then landed in Alexandria either late 1769 or 1770. So I started then researching the whole process behind here, and I was just absolutely stunned, like how much information I uncovered about this obscure 18th century brewer. I mean, I wrote a 10,000 word article about him, and I found so much primary documentation.
I saw that article and I was really impressed by, like you say, how much information there was, except it seems like no one had compiled it into one source until you did.
Yeah. So for everyone here, I will give you a link to that. It's a free document. It's actually up on the Alexandria Alexandria Historical Society website. And so I'll show you what that is at the end, and you can feel free to download it and read much more information than I can give you here today. But I want to walk you through Andrew Wales's history and take you back to 18th century Alexandria, right from the period when the town is first born. And the very young George Washington helps as part of the surveying crew that lays out the town. So pretty amazing. So jumping right here into the talk here. By the way, this is me up at the Guinness Brewery last year. So I finally got a chance to go up there. The one up there in Relay, Maryland, up by BWI. Well worth
Oh,
a day trip.
wow.
Yeah.
Fun.
Well worth a day trip once they reopen. So it's really cool. So, it's 45 minutes away from here, and it's a fantastic tour. And they got a big pub space, outdoor space and whatnot. So very
Nice.
cool. Oh, let me move the slide here forward. Here we go. Oh, sorry. So, so I'm your, I guess it's not quite happy hour yet, but you're a happy host.
Yeah, it depends. We're in COVID time.
Exactly. So it's, one of my friends likes to say it's 9 a.m. somewhere. So I need to get the store though first and get some more beer. But so here's the book I wrote a few years ago, and that's why I discovered about Andrew Wales, and that's why I got more curious about him and decided I'd do some more research about him. But he lands in Alexandria certainly by 1770. And Alexandria is just so full of history. I have a couple different tours that I lead in Old Town. And there's just, every building tells a different story. It's just oozes so much charm, as I like to say. And along the way, one of our first little artifacts we come across is this original downspout. And I don't know if people want to type in the questions. Actually, I'm going to turn my little chat thing on so I can read. But if anyone wants to look at this thing, read it, you have to kind of turn your head, but tell me what's unique about this downspout.
Oh, I see it.
You see it? Yeah, you got to read it. And then you go, oh my gosh.
I really like it. I think it should be a hashtag, Alexandria, DC.
Yeah, do you all see that on the vertical? It says Alexandria, DC. So not Alexandria, VA, it's Alexandria, DC. So this is right at the corner of Prince and Fairfax Street. So right along my Andrew Wales tour route. And so this is, and there's actually two of them that I know about. The other's right across the street. And so this is a pre-retrocession downspout. And by retrocession, we're talking about when Alexandria and Arlington, where I live, were once part of the District of Columbia. Remember, it was a diamond, 100 square miles. And so a third of it was in Virginia and 2/3 in Maryland, with the Potomac in between. And of course, there was slavery everywhere across this. And Alexandria had a booming slave trading market. Virginia was exporting slaves. And so they got really concerned about losing the slave market because of the rising abolitionist movement in DC. And so they petitioned to allow Alexandria to rejoin the state of Virginia, which was successful in 1846. So this is a pre-1846, pre-retrocession downspout. So this is why it's kind of historic. So yeah, Ian, very good. So yeah, Ian Rothman got that one right. So go Ian. Buy yourself a beer.
Good. Yes.
Buy yourself a beer, Ian. Cool. You're welcome. I love a little chat program here. So, all right, moving forward here. Here we go. So yeah, Alexandria was founded in 1749. So 2 years before Georgetown does. And Carolyn and I were chatting yesterday, and before I could even say the word, she said the word I was actually thinking. Georgetown feels more like a destination. Alexandria feels a little more community-like. They're both, certainly lots of people live there and whatnot. But I think partly because Georgetown's got Wisconsin Avenue and M Street, it's sort of this, retail ground zero. Alexandria has a little bit of that, but it's a lot quieter. Lots of tourists certainly go there and whatnot, but you see very similar architecture. It's all post-War of Independence architecture where all the merchants were making a lot of money after the war. So they upgraded their houses from wooden houses to brick houses. So lots of federal architecture and Georgian style architecture you see all around it. And it just oozes charm. So I love it. And yeah, it's wonderful. I oftentimes joke that if you want to move to Alexandria and especially if you want to live in Old Town, you're going to need two fortunes. So one to buy the house and the other to maintain it.
Oh yeah.
It is a historic district, and you can't put up Pella windows or vinyl siding or any of that stuff. They're very strict about it because that's the gold mine for them.
Right.
So our man of the hour is Andrew Wales. And what you're looking at, there's actually a street named after him, a very short alleyway right on the waterfront. And it's named Wales Alley. A little tip real quickly, he actually never owned this alley. Historically, it actually should be called Fitzgerald Alley. after the man who created this alleyway, John Fitzgerald, who built this house, that building you're looking at right there. That is the Fitzgerald Warehouse, and that's the oldest extant building on the Alexandria waterfront, and it's right next to the torpedo factory.
Okay.
So you very well may have walked past it. There's a Starbucks right there in the building. The Old Town Bookstore is in there, so great little bookstore. I love a little pop-up bookstore, and they extended their lease, and they're wonderful. But yeah, so we have actually a street named after our very first brewer, because he always kept his brewery close to the waterfront. All right, let's talk about the origins of Alexandria. So this is a very famous map drawn in 1749 by a 17-year-old George Washington.
Oh my goodness.
He was a second son, and therefore he was not going to inherit anything. So he had to develop a trade for himself, a career. And so he was really good at math. So he decided to become a surveyor because it involves a lot of geometry. And he was part of the crew that laid out Alexandria in 1749. And you see how the city was laid out with the grid. So a classic English grid. You see all the street names that are on there. King Street, sort of the center to the left. And you might notice there's two peninsulas on either side.
Yeah.
And then this shallow area, that at extreme low tide, is a mud flat. And so right away, that was a big problem because they couldn't get big ocean-going vessels into the harbor.
Yeah, and I'm probably getting way ahead of you here, but when I saw that image, I just thought of things that have been discovered in that area recently.
Yes, we'll talk about some of those, including the first brewery. Whoa. Yeah. Well, nerding out, spinning the little propeller thing on my head. So yeah, and where Wales, where he owned his property was basically 56. So to the left of King Street, you might see a little 56, 57, and 58. That's the area where he owned his breweries. And I'll walk you through the actual.
And is that what made him choose that location? I mean, I know in that time, industry tended to be down by the waterfront. So is that one of the reasons? Is there?
There was a key reason. He always wanted to make sure his brewery was close to the waterfront because his key customers were ship's captains. Yeah. Okay. So it was really important. As well, in the Mid-Atlantic, we don't grow barley. We're way too wet of a climate. So instead, he had to buy the barley and export it in.
And so it'd be coming in.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of George Washington, by the way, Andrew Wales had a 3-decade-long commercial relationship with George Washington. I found that all in George Washington's papers. The man kept records of everything. So incredible. They were never friends or anything like that, but he bought beer from him in 1765 and barley in the 1780s. So
wow,
it was a transactional relationship.
Yeah, but still
for him. So pretty cool. So here's, by the way, an advertisement. So one of the many things I uncovered, like looking at old newspaper articles, and this is from 1789, and this shows you, in fact, what kind of beer that Andrew Wales was brewing. So you see right on there, that first line and the second line, a large quantity of, all caps, strong and small beer. And what strong beer was, that was the beer of Scotland throughout the 18th century, all the way about till 1825 or so, and then replaced by IPAs. As the British Empire grew, they needed something that they could ship over huge distances, which IPAs supported that because they're heavily hopped. So that was their preservative.
So the strong beer would be considered today like a craft brew, a regional.
This was all definitely craft brew. He probably had an operation brewing 1,000 barrels a year or so. Yeah. The strong beer itself was, we brewed it, and some friends, we brewed this a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, and came out 8.2%. So it was strong. Yeah. We'd call it today a high gravity pale ale. And then the small beer, I love that one. It's a little clue into that one is about Scottish frugality. The Scots, of course, were always poor. And so what they did, they would take the grain from having boiled the first batch of wort. So that's the sugar water that you create. You then add more water to it and reboil it. So it's like reusing a tea bag. So it's gonna be very thin. And what they did, they added molasses to it to give it some sugar, because you need the yeast to be able to eat something that's gonna convert the grain into alcohol. And create
you just have to drink more of that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, so the small beer was very low in alcohol, so typically like a third the price, and 2%, 2 to 3% alcohol rather than 8.2. But yeah, it's just one of the many things I found out about Andrew Wales. It's so cool. In addition, of course, finding out that he was a Tory during the War of Independence and got involved in a prison break that landed him in jail. So
in jail in Virginia?
After War of Independence, and it's kind of
Was he in jail in Virginia?
in Williamsburg, in the state capital. Yeah,
Oh wow.
yeah. So they all got caught, and they got these 9 POWs sprung out of the Alexandria jail, and
Wow.
got them out to the Royal Navy. They got them. They escaped, and then the ringleaders spilled the beans on everyone. So
Wow.
they all got placed on trial, and and George Washington's stepson Jackie went to the trial and watched it, and everyone knew these guys were guilty, but they got off on a technicality. So it's so interesting. So Wales ended up going to Bladensburg for a couple of years and working as a hey Tim Holt, hey. Just asked, where did he get his hops from? Tim Holt, by the way, just asked a question, and he is actually in England. So fantastic that Tim joined us here today. He got the hops for locally. We can actually grow hops here in the Mid-Atlantic. You can grow them pretty much everywhere. They grow them in New Mexico, upstate New York. Before Prohibition, that's where most of the hops came from. Most of our hops today in the United States are grown out in the Pacific Northwest. So Washington State and Oregon are where most of our hops. It's just the right climate. And most of our barley today in the U.S. is grown in the adjacent states of Idaho and Montana. It just has the right climate for growing barley today. Thank you for that, Tim. Cool. So let me show you where, again, kind of overlaying George Washington's map of 1749. I laid it on its side. And here you can see where Andrew Wales's 3 brewing sites were. So he first leased space at what was called the Town Warehouse at Point Lumley, which is right at the foot of Duke Street. He was there until 1774, and then moved out into his own property and stayed there at that second site where you see this number 2 star. Mm-hmm. And then that brewery then burned down in 1788. Then he moved it even closer. And it looks like it's out there in the middle of the water. However, they had moved the waterfront out. They had a big project in the early 1780s after the War of Independence was over to basically fill in the shoals so they could get big ocean-going vessels. Yeah. Okay. And of course, you've heard of flooding at Old Town Alexandria. Whenever there's a thunderstorm and a high tide, it floods. Mm-hmm. And guess where it floods? The infill section. So the part that you see that's where it floods because it's all infill. Yeah, so I'll show you some cool photos of that here in just a couple of minutes. So, by the way, talking Carolyn kind of teed this up here about different discoveries. This is from November of 2015. It's almost 5 years ago. And this made a fair amount of news, but not nearly as much news as the discovery of the ships did.
Right, yeah.
The ship discovered right over there, just a little bit, and everyone kind of freaked out about the ship. And I'm like, yawn. It's not the first brewery. This photo you're looking at right here, this is the first brewery in the DC area. So I'm much more like, yeah. Though this was the Town Warehouse. This is the building that Andrew Wales leased space. It was built by John Carlisle, one of the 3 Alexandria founders. And in 1755, when the town was only 6 years old. So this was a tobacco warehouse, and it was available when Wales got here. So he simply leased space there from the city and set up shop. So that's it. So it's pretty amazing. And I told that to Alexandria Archaeology when they uncovered the building. And so they allowed me to go walk all over it. It's pretty amazing. But where the archaeology team is, kind of the cluster right there in the photo, look at their feet. Do you see the floorboards?
Yes. Is that what that is? I did see that. Holy mackerel.
There is so much of this building that still survived. It's amazing. And all they did, when they closed the building in the 1780s, and when they shut it down, they simply just pulled down the walls and the roof and just threw it all over and threw dirt over it and built over on top of it. So it's right at the water line, so it stayed nice and wet, and that's how it preserved. Yeah. It's currently, all this wood is over in Maryland right now, in the Maryland Archaeological Conservation Lab, MAC Lab, being preserved. And then they have to figure out what to do with it because it's a 100-foot long building. It's a lot of wood.
Well, so 5 years later, what's happening down here?
It is today. I'll show you here in just a second. I'll show you what's there on that site. But I wanted to show you just real quickly, this is the backbone of the building.
Right, that's amazing.
This is a single 100-foot long oak tree.
That's just amazing.
And look how they notched it down in the foreground. Look how they notched it, that beam. That's all done by hand. The craftsmanship that went into this, and all the foundations were there as well. So I got a whole bunch of photos I took walking all over this. But
oh my goodness.
The foundations were stone blocks. They kind of piled up and then put the log on top of it. That's just 17.
And was this a result of intentional archaeological excavation, Or was this kind of, oh my gosh, one day the water receded and we saw this?
No, they knew it was there. It was on all the maps. Alexandria is very well documented. They've got all kinds of pictures, diagrams, all the, like how I found out about Andrew Wales's 3 sites was through property transaction records, all documented exactly how much he paid for every site. And then I just started laying it out on a map, and it's like, oh, it all made sense when I just put it on on an actual map.
Wow.
In this case, this particular site used to have a warehouse on it that they knocked over. What they were doing was building the Hotel Indigo, and they knew that the warehouse was going to be there. So they had it on a map, they had diagrams of it, and sure enough, it was right exactly where it was. What they didn't know was a month later when they found the ship, then they were like, oh, whoa, they weren't expecting that. There was no record of a ship.
Wow.
Yeah. So the hotel is now up on the block right there to the right. Immediately adjacent is the Robinson Terminal.
Yeah. Okay.
And that is, of course, where they found the other 3 ships. So, yeah, those are all in the process of being, they've been excavated and are all sitting in a huge swimming pool right now. So, and eventually I think they're going to put those into a pond. So they'll be preserved rather than conserved, if you know the difference, versus the town warehouse and that first ship are both being conserved.
What is it? State the difference in case folks are unclear about that.
Cool. Preservation basically means that you're going to make sure it's not destroyed, but you're not taking further steps to, like the case of the town warehouse that's being conserved, as well as the ship. They put those in a giant vat of polyethylene glycol, and it takes a couple of years. It basically leaches in and replaces the water in there, and after that they freeze dry it, so it basically turns it into concrete. And after that, it's preserved forever. It's conserved forever. So some ships have been done that, like the Mary Rose in England was done that way. The Vasa in Stockholm, the big ship that sank in 1628. So polyethylene glycol,
Wow.
or PEG. Yeah, it's a pretty amazing thing, and that way they can permanently preserve the wood. So that's the conservation aspect of it, rather than the other 3 ships will be just stuck into a pond where they'll stay permanently wet, and then they'll figure out in the future if someone else wants to do something with them. So again, they're preserved rather than conserved. Cool. All right, so here's a little close-up here of Wales's second brewing site, and this is a place I take people on the tour of. So this is kind of a close-up, and I've got a third one as well, but you see how close this was to the waterfront. And the street he was facing was Water Street itself. It's today now Lee Street. But he wanted to keep it really, really close to where the ship's captains were and so on. So really, really important for him. And by the way, here is Wales Alley today. Unfortunately, there's no signs on it, but this is a super popular spot right here. Whenever I lead tours, we come down here, there's always some wedding party right here, getting their picture taken, because it's such a beautiful little spot. And, as I said, Alexandria just oozes charm. His brewery, by the way, is to the left. So this is the garden right behind the Athenaeum, which is now the Northern Virginia Fine Arts Association. And yes, that wall right there is kind of leaning a little bit.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yes, it is. So it's part of the charm of Old Town. And that's where his brewery was. He brewed there. That was the second brewing site. And this is actually where he got arrested in after the prison break when he got busted. So again, a really wonderful little place here. And when I was researching this, I thought this is so interesting. Let me back up real quickly. Like, why did he create an alleyway? You see here. Here's the entire city block. Look to the left-hand block right there. You got a big square block.
Yep.
Why did he create an alleyway? And in part, the answer to that is, well, you've got this interior space that no one's using, and it's a way to fully access the interior part of the block, because people didn't really have backyards, that kind of stuff back then. So it was a way, a lot of Alexandria's industry popped up in the alleyways. So developing it. So DC, by the way, has the same thing. The blocks that Pierre Lafont built were massively large.
Right.
And so if you're like in DuPont Circle, anything that's not a letter, like Swan Street, Church Street, those are all former alleyways that were expanded into streets, because no one needed a yard that big, It just, all the neighbors got together and decided, hey, let's subdivide this.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So Wales basically subdivided this property and created this alleyway so you'd have access to it. But even then, I was still wondering, why did he build along an alleyway as opposed to right along a street? And then I started researching Edinburgh breweries, and it was like, oh, eureka! So here's an Edinburgh brewery from 1760.
Oh my goodness.
The one, this is
Wow.
right on the Grass Market. There are actually two breweries that are right on this. But Edinburgh is very, very famous for these long, narrow tenements because they got taxed on the number of windows that they had, and the Scots being so frugal. So they built these super long structures that were very, very narrow. And then they had narrow alleyways known as either a close or a wind. And in this case here, this is a two-sided brewery with the close right going down the very, very middle of it. So in essence, what Wales did, he built what he knew. He was an Edinburgh brewer, and so he brought a little bit of Edinburgh with him, and that's what he established in Alexandria. And it was like, oh, duh. But sometimes it took, the puzzle pieces to be able to fit them together. And I was like, oh, I should have figured that one out earlier. But it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, but why would you, but when you think about how alleys, like you mentioned, were used typically in Washington, D.C., that isn't what would come to mind.
Yeah.
That someone would intentionally create a brewery that way. And for instance, probably you would know about someone like Christian Heinrich. He didn't do that, did he?
No, he bought an existing brewery and then.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, his first one in DuPont Circle, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but again, this is that's a 19th century brewer. Wales is an 18th century brewer.
Right. Yeah. That's right. That's right too.
Yeah. So pre-industrial age and so on. So I just love this picture here though, because it gives you all the architectural features. I've been looking at dozens of breweries of the time, and this is the one it's very clear all the different architectural features of the brewery. It shows you all the stuff and how complicated it was brewing beer back then. These guys really were scientists and fairly sophisticated. So they didn't make
and they lived there.
And they lived there as well.
Family residents.
Yeah. So it's really cool. All right. Here's, by the way, we're at the foot of Wales Alley, and this is kind of where I stop real quickly, and I point out something that's really wondrous. When they filled in the waterfront, all you had to do was pay for the extension, and you got to keep the land. So Wales had bought a little sliver of land where you see that yellow house there in the background, and that was the best investment he ever made, because when they started filling in the waterfront, they moved it out 400 feet, then he got a whole brand new piece of property for himself. Yeah. And it's kind of amazing. I'm going to show you real quickly here the GW map again. So if you look over here toward the left, you'll see a really small number 56, if you can see that. So it's right off of the shaded in area. So right on the waterfront. And that's where the yellow house is. So it's a tiny little triangle, if you can see that.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's where his house was. And then you drew a straight line out, and that's where the new Wales Alley goes. So, and I'll show you what they had to do. Alexandria, when they built the city, was on a 20-foot bluff. So not only did they have a bluff, and then they had these mud flats at low tide. So they had to do what they called the banking out process to fill the whole thing in. So I always point out to people when we're standing right here, I make them all turn around and make them look across to the sidewalk. And what they're going to see is this. So look at the sidewalk right there. There's kind of an early 19th century, early 20th century building right there to your left. And then look right in the middle. There's Wales Alley, the next portion of it. And you notice right beyond the sidewalk, there's a plunge.
Yeah.
That is the old bank of the Potomac River.
That's wow.
It. Yeah, so it's really cool when you walk down it. It's really steep. So and everything beyond the bottom of it is all infill.
Wow.
So that's all dates to the 1780s. And that's also where it floods. So so I'll show you another photo real quickly, how steep this was. It used to be a lot steeper. It used to be a sheer drop off, but part of the banking out process, they kind of leveled it down. But it definitely goes downhill all the way down to the waterfront. So pretty cool. All these little remnants of that, you don't know it's there.
Yeah. I mean, we don't really have, this is reminding me of the area in DC, Foggy Bottom, the southern part of Foggy Bottom, what meets the Potomac River, where the old observatory is. Yes. And you think about how high up that's elevated, and you would have gotten a way better sense of that in the 19th century. But then we kind of got our own infill, and we got I-66 going across the river, and you can't really get that sense anymore. But that at one time also was sort of a promontory, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I know they picked that site for the observatory. And the observatory, by the way, is still there. You've all driven past it on 66. You probably just haven't noticed it, but I think the State Department owns it now, I believe.
Yeah. Both of those entities are still in there. Yeah.
But the reason they picked that particular site was because it was the one site every day they would drop the balloon,
Oh, yeah.
You indicated it was 12 noon, and it's the one side of the city that everyone, ship captains in Alexandria, Georgetown, and Anacostia could all see this one point, and all set their watches right by the observatory. So that's what their job was to set the time for everyone.
Yeah.
So pretty amazing. We have a second observatory as well, up where the VP lives.
Righto. Yeah. Nowhere near the water.
Nowhere near the water at all. So, but cool. All right, continuing right along, onto our third Wales brewing site. And again, after the first brewery burned down in 1788, so we're kind of building out the map. So the first map you see at the top, and then we're building that out on the lower portion of it. So here's his third site. So the second brewery site burned down in 1788. And so he moved it, again, to be closer toward the waterfront to this new infill space. And we walk along here as well along the tour. So he simply extended Wales Alley, so it's now a 2-block long alleyway. It takes you all the way down to the waterfront itself. So pretty amazing. And where you see that store tavern, that is now the Union Street Public House. So a restaurant that's right there on that particular site. There's really nothing left of the brewery unless you could go excavate underground. These were wooden buildings. He wasn't building these buildings here for posterity or anything like that. He was a merchant and a very frugal one. So that's it. And for the most part, these are all private residences now, and these are their carports. That's where.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we walk along the alleyway and we're standing in our carports. So you'd have to get permission to do a dig and that kind of stuff. So I doubt that's ever going to happen. But it's pretty interesting. So, and he brewed, by the way, from 1770 all the way until 1798. And why that's important and why he becomes then the first brewer in the District of Columbia, because in 1791, when the district is created, Alexandria is annexed into this new district, and he's the only brewer in the entire new district, and therefore he's the first.
Yep.
Yeah, he's not the first in the city of Washington. That's Cornelius Cunningham, who sets up shop in 1796.
And where was his brewery? Was that in the Foggy Bottom?
It was. It's basically where Constitution Gardens is now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And then he moved it down to by the ballpark, so right where parking lot's Asian Eye is. So very close to where you live.
Yeah.
So, and
So
that's
it's interesting. So he first is by the Potomac, and then he moves to the Anacostia River.
Yeah, because there was so much more action by the Navy Yard, because all the shipbuilding, and it was really the big anchorage for DC.
So that's good customer base.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, ship's captains and the working class.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Cool. So moving right along, one of the last stops we come to is to this church right here, where you see George Washington up on the side right here, and this is actually the old Presbyterian meeting house. It's actually the site where we meet when we actually start this tour, and they don't actually call it a church because any guesses why? So concerning colonial times, if anyone wants to put it in the chat, why do you think that
I don't have a guess.
Presbyterians could not call their church a church?
I stumped.
Stumped, cool.
Three participants raised hands, so somebody has an idea.
Yeah. You want to?
Oh,
Evan Golden got it right, and followed by Brenda. Yeah, it's exactly right. We had an official church, the Church of England, and thus in Alexandria there are two big ethnic groups right from the outset. There were the planters, who were the English. They had the Church of England, and then the merchants who came in, who were the Scots. And Alexandria and Georgetown were both founded by Scottish tobacco merchants. They couldn't call their Presbyterian church a church because it was not official, even though it's the Church of Scotland. So that's why it had to be a meeting house rather than a church. So it's kind of semantics, but it's one of those things that as soon as we declared our independence, all the states had to effectively disassociate themselves from the Church of England. And really interesting little thing happened in there. Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death, was the governor of Virginia. And he tried to pass a bill reestablishing essentially the Episcopal Church as the official church, which then would mean taxes that would go towards it, and everyone would have to pay 10%. And there was just a huge firestorm among all the religious dissenters. James Madison, they got this petition going. Andrew Will signed the petition as a Presbyterian, basically saying, please don't, let's not have an official religion. And that's where we are today. So the petition worked. So we have no official religion in our country. And I think that's a good thing personally, but rather than having something that's official. So anyways, Wales and his wife, Margaret, were founding members of this church when it was founded in 1772, Meeting House. And really interesting. So here's the back side of it. This is also, by the way, where George Washington's 4 local memorial services were held. And behind it
I've been in this church. Now that I'm seeing the front of it, I've been in this church. Yeah,
it's pretty cool. I mean, given we always sort of joke as the Presbyterians being, the quote, frozen chosen. And yet, and the inside of it's actually way more decorative than, say, Christ Church is, the Anglican Church that George Washington belonged to. So it's pretty cool. There is, just like Christ Church, back then all the churches were using their backyards as burial grounds. But what do you think is missing from this picture?
I don't know. Bells. Oh, there's a bell tower.
Crucifix, bell, steeple. Yeah, we do have those. We got the bell and the steeple. The answer is any kind of marker for Andrew and Margaret Wales. So they both died in 1799. She died in March of tuberculosis or consumption. And then he died in the end of November, 2 weeks before George Washington died. And he died of...
There's no gravesite?
We know he's buried there, but there's about 300 people who are buried here, and only about 3 dozen had tombstones. And these were, they call this here the Westminster Abbey of Alexandria's Scottish community. But these are all the elites who could have fancy tombstones. Everyone else probably had like a wooden tombstone, and they decayed or got vandalized over time. So we're not certain where Andrew and Margaret are buried. They are there somewhere. We have the record for it, but we don't know exactly where. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Them and other people then. It's not just, it's a whole host, a holy host are beneath there somewhere.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. If you look over there, kind of to the right, you see it's kind of short and stubby. It's like a little table. It's got 6 legs on it. Yeah. That's John Carlyle's grave. He is the one of the 3 town founders of Alexandria. And then over to the left, you can't see it, but there's a tomb of the unknown soldier from the War of Independence that they have. And they have a real cool little handout. You can go pick that little information thing, pick up the little thing, and you can grab it and take it with you. And it outlines every single person who has a tombstone there. So
at least the Wales are mentioned. They're listed there. We just don't know where.
They themselves are not mentioned. It's only the ones who actually have tombstones.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've been bugging the church for years, like, hey, can we put up a little marker for Andrew Wales? And we haven't gotten to that point yet. But even have the funding source. So Bill Butcher from Port City said he'd chip in.
We gotta do that.
Our first brewer, but it's hard. So, anyways, kind of getting here to the end of my talk here real quickly, but I went and saw this play a couple years ago in Russian at the Kennedy Center. Brilliant play. You see why Chekhov is so brilliant. But
Three Sisters. Oh, yes.
3 Sisters, yeah.
Exactly.
And this question that all 3 sisters ask at the very end, which is about, it's a question of, is happiness possible? And so all 3 of them, one by one, answer this with a rhetorical question: if we could only know, And that's why Chekhov is one of the greats, But the question I wanted to ask, if we only knew what this beer tasted like that Andrew Wales brewed. And the answer to that is actually we do know what it tastes like because we brewed it at the now closed, unfortunately, Portner Brew House. And we brewed this in March of 2017. And if you know Mike Stein, that's him there on the right with a crazy beard. And I'm there in the background. I'm not a brewer myself, so I'd written that biography, so I got to come along for it. But Mike Stein and Pete Jones were the 2 who reverse engineered this beer. It was pretty amazing.
I was going to say, I bet you didn't have a recipe.
They had to reverse engineer it. And so we used all original ingredients. So we found a malt stir from England that Thomas Fawcett from 1815, they were founded. And we got Kent hops, which were very popular, and imported those from England. And we used Scottish ale yeast. And that was the one thing I did. I manned the squeegee and I got to put the yeast in. Like, woo!
And how much did you produce?
Yeah, so we basically made, the first batch here was a 7, I'm forgetting the terminology for it. I'm not a brewer. So basically we had 2 of these kettles. So I think each one of them was 3.5. So, and then of course we made a small beer as well. So we had both of them. And you see, these are unfiltered. You see the little picture right there? So those were, fairly pale in color. They're unfiltered, so that hence they look kind of cloudy. But the one on the right, it's kind of hard to tell here, but that was the actual, that was the small beer. So with the molasses, so it's a little bit darker in color. If we'd filtered it, it would have been super, super light in color. But it was just delicious. And they brewed it several times. It was a huge hit at the brew pub, but unfortunately they went out of business about 2 years ago.
What is there a beer that we can get in our metro area that reminds you of this beer?
Not really. No one's really making a strong beer right now. It's so unique. So we have lots of saisons, which are Belgian styles, and but yeah, this is really unique. So it's a high gravity pale ale. Yeah.
Who got to partake of this? I mean, they made enough they could. Did they sell it commercially? Did they sell it to a bar?
Yeah. Oh, they sold it at the brew pub itself.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a big hit. It was delicious. It really was. It was quite good. So it had a number of beers that were really quite good. So I was super proud of being able to be part of that process, even just letting. I provided the history that went behind it and lots of corny humor, and the squeegee manning. So, but it was a really fun day, a full day together of just hanging out.
Like Christopher Walken on cowbell,
Yeah,
Garrett Peck on squeegee.
Yeah. Kathleen just asked, what does it taste like? Any commercial produce similarities? Yeah, it definitely was a pale ale, basically, high alcohol pale ale, and very, very pale in color. We made, I didn't discover this till after the fact, but we made one historical mistake, which was that we dry hopped it. And back then, as I learned afterwards, the Scots did not dry hop their beers. That's very much a 19th century thing. So they definitely put hops in it, but that was only during the boil, and that was for preservation.
Did Andrew Wales spend his whole adult professional life as a brewer?
Yeah, he would have started as a teenager as an apprentice in Edinburgh. They had a very established system, like a brewing guild. And there were at least 24 breweries I've already uncovered from his from his earlier days in Edinburgh. So it was very crowded. A city of 50,000 people with 24 breweries.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think his motivation to immigrate was for, I mean, it could have been for adventure, but I think it was for economic promise?
Yeah.
He thought.
He came over at the age of 28 and he got married right beforehand. He and Margaret married in November of 1764. So right before they jumped on a ship. There's no personal letters or anything like that to definitively know why they came over. But my hunch was that he got recruited. And at age 28, he was now a brewery manager. So one step up, the next, having started probably at age 14 or so, he had learned the entire art and business of brewing, which is very, very sophisticated. So it takes a decade and a half or so to get to the point of being a brewing manager. The next step would have been to buy a brewery or open up a brewery. And so he wasn't quite there yet. And there was this brewery down in Stafford County called the Marlborough Brewery. And a guy named John Mercer wanted to open up this thing. So an 8,000 barrel a year operation. And his letters do survive. So he certainly was looking for a brewer. So I think he was probably the one who recruited Wales to come over. So they were looking for an experienced brewer to come over, take over that brewery. That brewery failed after a couple of years. And then that's why Wales moved on and came to Alexandria, because
I think I recall from your article that, is that a reason that brewery didn't make it was because it produced a bad product? There's a moment I remember in your article where a bad product is being produced and Andrew Wales improves it.
Yeah, he got there. I think he had this contract that he was going to be the brewer, and then Mercer brought in one of his relatives and said, "Oh wait, no, sorry, Wales, it's going to be this other guy. He's going to be the head brewer." And Wales was just incensed over this because, like, you hired me to do this job, and he protested and so on. And so Mercer allowed him to brew his own beer, a smaller batch. The other guy brewed most of the beer, and it was undrinkable. And so Mercer mentions this in a letter. The only beer he could sell was the stuff that Wales made. I'm like, and this is why you hire a professional, That's why you hire an actual plumber rather than trying to do it all yourself,
Well, what's interesting too is, I mean, he has this expertise and this ability, and obviously he must have had a really good palate. Mm-hmm. That even being on the wrong side of the War of Independence and getting arrested, doesn't deep six his career as a brewer in the area.
Correct. Yeah. He continues to brew even after the brewery goes bankrupt. In fact, he gets a kind of license to kind of strike out on his own. So he jumps out with the ship's captain and sails around and starts hitting different ports and selling us beer, and everyone loves it. And he's advertising, he's making new relationships. George Washington is buying beer from him. So he gets a name for a quality brewer. And I think this experience shows him afterwards, like, I don't want to work for anyone ever again. I want to be my own boss. And he never has a boss ever again. So when the brewery finally goes defunct and they liquidate the assets, that's when he and Margaret move up to Alexandria.
Okay.
Yeah.
He eventually must have gotten competition.
In the 1790s, so 2 decades after he shows up, over 2 decades, he finally gets some competition.
Wow, so, but that was, I mean, he had a pretty good run then.
Yeah, all the way till 1792. He had the market to himself. 22 years. Amazing.
And in that, so yeah, because when DC is founded, even in Georgetown, there's no brewery there, is there?
There's not. Eventually, some do open up, certainly, yeah. But yeah, none like right away. Oh, couple questions here. Kathleen had asked, wonder if Scotland still produces anything like it, like heirloom beer. I was hoping to get over to Scotland this year, so yeah, that ain't gonna happen. So, but Scotland is certainly seeing this resurgence in beer. You know, Scotland is best known, of course, these days for whiskey, and beer was largely forgotten about. Once the British Empire collapsed, all the breweries collapsed as well because they were making beer for the empire. And just in recent years, along with this great resurgence of craft brews in the U.S., Scotland has also seen this big resurgence. But they're very experimental, just like we are. So a lot of the different beers I'm seeing, you know, just like us, they're playing around with all kinds of different things. The real famous Scottish style that we know about, which you can find at different bars, basically takes its cues from the Belgians. So really high in alcohol. They do a double fermentation, and that all comes from Belgium because it's so close to them. It's right on the trade routes and so on. So I'm not aware, but I'm also not deeply in touch with what's going on intimately with what's going on in the brewing scene in Scotland. So I need to get over there. Once we get a vaccine, then, you know, hopefully to jump on a plane and get over there. So, yeah. Tim Holt asked, did he increase the range of beers he brewed, such as porters? And the answer to that was no. He brewed strong beer and small beer for his entire career. Once he sold the brewery off, then actually the person who bought it, interestingly enough, was the first brewery owner in the city of Washington, Cornelius Cunningham, who is English. And he then introduced porter into the former Wales brewery facility. The brewery itself shut down in 1802, and then they developed it, the site. So it was Cunningham who really introduced porter to Alexandria and probably to DC as well. Him being English. Cool. Thanks for asking that question, Tim.
For folks who are listening, I'm having a really strong desire to have beer now, especially looking at the image of those two beautiful golden beverages. Mm-hmm. So I want to do that. Let's say I want to try to do something that's very local and maybe a beer that has a real tie to DC brewing history, DC area brewing history. What are some beers I could go try? Can't go to a brewery tour right now, but where could I maybe find some beer, and what beer should I look for?
Yeah. All the breweries, obviously, you can't go and do the tours right now, as Carolyn said, but they do curbside pickup, which is really nice. And they've all sort of figured out they've all had to pivot, just like everyone else has. Like restaurants have had to, you know, they do delivery. It's just kind of amazing. And this is how they're staying in business. So, so the very first one in the city of Washington, that in the District of Columbia, that reopened after Hybrid closed is DC Brow. And so it's a great one you can support. If you live in Alexandria, of course, there's Port City, and they do curbside pickup as well. They all do curbside pickup now, which is really cool. So, and they all have their different styles, which is really amazing. 3 Stars, I love, is another one. I love all of them. But just kind of pick out the ones you want. And yeah, I've been encouraging people to support your local businesses because it makes such a difference. We really do need to help out our local retailers. They employ a lot of people. And, you know, this recession that we're in, we are in a deep recession, as you probably know, and this is going to go on for a long time. Until we get a vaccine, we're going to be in a big economic downturn. So we got to give a financial lifeline to our local retailers just to make sure they can survive until they can get back to that point where they can start giving tours again.
Right. Where is DC Brow brewed?
DC Brow is over on Bladensburg Road, so not too far away from the Maryland line, but actually in DC.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Port City, is that brewed in Alexandria proper?
It is. It's on Wheeler Avenue, I think 3650 Wheeler Avenue. So not too far away from the police headquarters and police academy. So kind of the west end of town.
Right.
Yeah, really cool. Really great site to go visit.
And probably, I guess, Garrett, would you agree that the brewer in the region historically who has had the highest profile, was that Christian Heinrich?
Definitely Christian Heinrich, yeah.
And just for folks who maybe don't know who that is, just what's the sort of elevator speech about Christian Heinrich?
Yeah, Christian Heinrich was like the Methuselah of brewing, because he got to DC in 1872. He was already an adult, and he lived all the way to 1945. He died through 3 weeks before his 103rd birthday. So incredible. So he saw World War I and the anti-German hysteria. He saw World War II, and he died in April. So right before the war ended. So kind of amazing. His big brewing site was the site where the Kennedy Center is now. So a site right along the river, and also partly where the Theodore Roosevelt Bridge is as well. So big, very, very large, 500,000 barrel a year operation. Had about half the capacity of all the brewing capacity in the city. So pretty amazing. But he shut down, that brewery actually shut down in 1956. And then we went 55 years without a brewery until DC Brow opened up.
Yeah.
So very, very important brewer for our history.
Right. And the brewery's gone, obviously. The Heinrich brewery's gone. In fact, I guess all of our breweries that would have been, now could it be historic structures, are gone.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
one place we have that is I think, such a nice touchstone and a little bit of a mecca for local beer and brewing is Christian Heinrich's house in DC's DuPont Circle neighborhood. It's a remarkable late 19th century, well, some people call it a beer baron's castle.
Yeah.
And indeed, it does look a little bit like a castle. It's open to the public. You can take a tour of it. You can just see how beer infused even the decor of his home, beer drinking. And they also do quite a nice job of supporting local brews. They'll have tastings and events.
Yeah, absolutely. It is de facto our brewing museum in the DC area. Yeah.
Right.
So they've every month, obviously they can't do this right now, but they have history and hops events. So they bring
That's right. Yes, history and hops.
Yeah, it's wonderful. They are reopening their garden here. I got a note from Kim Bender, the executive director there, was a friend of mine. So they are, along with the phase 2 and phase 3 openings, are gradually being able to reopen their garden to allow people to come into the site. But so
and
yeah,
how did we compare? I guess in some ways in the national consciousness, it may be that Baltimore had a higher profile as a brewer of at least producer of brands that kind of got into people's consciousness nationwide more so than we did. Am I right in making that observation?
I think so. Yes. Yeah. Like Heinrich, he sold his beer outside of the city, but his big secondary market was Norfolk, Virginia. So he could just load it onto a barge and send it down there. But those were his two big markets. So he was really a regional provider, whereas Baltimore had some bigger breweries, certainly like Natty Boh,
Yeah, right.
Well recognized around the country, So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, once Heinrich shut down, we didn't get another brewery again. And so in fact, we missed the whole beer 1.0, which was the 1980s. Once, people were still, when all the home brewers decided they were going to open up breweries in the 1980s, and DC didn't get any breweries then. So we really reappeared quite late on the scene. Hence, there was no institutional memory of the fact we once used to be a big brewing town. We all think it all started in 2011 with DC Brow, but no, we started in 1770. It goes way back.
Right. So that gets me back to your book, because your book is a way of filling in that big blank in people's knowledge about what our area was like as a beer brewing place.
Yeah.
What prompted you to write that book?
I wrote an earlier book about prohibition in DC, and the publisher, the History Press, then asked me, this is the one book I've been asked to write. Otherwise, they've all been my own ideas, but they were doing a whole series of brewing histories by city. And since I had done the Prohibition book, and in that book, I had a chapter about how Prohibition affected the brewers called The Bottom of the Barrel. And so, so, and so they asked me to write that book. So it came out 6 years ago.
And were you excited about writing it, or did you think, oh, this would be sort of an interesting gig? Did it kind of grow on you? Did you sort of start to take over your enthusiasm?
Yeah, definitely was excited about it. And I was actually working on another book right then. So I kind of had to tell them, hey, give me another year. I was working on the history of the Seneca Quarry at the time when they pitched it to me. And I'm like, hold on, got one I'm working on already. So take a number. And then, and then right once I got that book out, I started working on the beer book.
What was the biggest surprise when you wrote the beer book that you just, like a discovery that you made that you didn't anticipate?
The couple big things. One, how much archival footage I was able to find. For example, by Andrew Wales. Just stunned once you go into an archive, finding all the stuff about this obscure 18th century brewer. That was really surprising. That was pretty amazing. Around all the different archives around DC, I put together in the book just an incredible number of historical photos. Many of them, of course, come from the Historical Society of Washington, DC. And it just gives you a good sense of what 19th century brewing looked like when the town was full of German immigrants and so on. And then another big surprise, we have this early photo, the first image we have of a brewery is from a painting from around 1836 or so. And it's a bigger image showing the Anacostia River. You see the White House and so on. But that's right. The kind of the foreground is the very first brewery. The first image of a brewery in DC was an old sugar refinery. And so I kind of wondered, okay, where exactly was that site? So
I know this painting.
And it's in Square 741, which is parking lots H and I, right next to the ballpark. And so that was kind of fun. It was a fun little historiography lesson, and being able to pinpoint the site, and then quietly lobbied the city, GSA, and so on, and also Forest City, which has the contract to develop the entire Navy Yard area. And a couple of years ago, I saw on a GSA map, they'd put a dotted line around the parking lot saying archaeologically significant zone. And I was like, yes. So at some point, the parking lot will get excavated. It's a very lucrative parking lot. So at some point, though, it'll be developed. And then we'll see what's there on that site. This was an 8-story tall brick building. It had to have a foundation. It had a malt house. And if things turn out at all like Alexandria did with the first brewery, there's going to be artifacts left behind.
Oh, wow.
So very excited about that someday.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So stay tuned.
Garrett, thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
That is really, boy, citizen historian. And that is going to be, I hope you're still living in the area when that happens. You got to come back if you're not. And,
yeah, I know. At least, like I discovered one thing, a brewery, pinpointed it. Yeah.
Wow.
It's pretty cool. So I'm looking forward to that here someday. So I know we're getting here toward the end of our time. I want to have some time here for Q&A, but if you'd like to learn more about, if you'd like to actually see this article, this 10,000 word article, it is on the Alexandria Historical Society website, or you can just Google Andrew Wales, Alexandria's first brewer, and it'll take you right to it. So, and it's free. You can download it. You can read it. It's got all these maps that you saw, lots of pictures. They're all in there, which is really cool. And if you need to reach me, you can contact me on my website, garrettpeck.com, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Oh, I forgot to put this in here. I slipped. I didn't slip. Intentional. I do have a brand new book that came out 4 weeks ago, completely unrelated to brewing, but it's my latest book, my 8th book. And it's a history of the first decade of the 21st century in the United States, called A Decade of Disruption, America and the New Millennium, 2000 to 2010. And yeah, we are currently in the biggest disruption any of us have ever experienced with this pandemic. It's unreal. And then, of course, the double disruption as well of BLM going on right now, the Black Lives Matter protests and so on. So just a quick little push here. If you're interested in getting this book or any other book or any other beer or anything retail or whatnot, please do support your local retailer. I know I'm kind of harping on this point here. I put down here Politics and Prose, they're just absolutely wonderful. But yeah, our local retailers really need a financial lifeline right now. And so you're buying your books from them, whether it's my book or any other book. helps keep them in business right now, which is just absolutely crucial. So please do support your local retailer. If you're not in DC, you don't have to buy it from Politics and Prose. We've got a whole bunch of different local bookstores in Alexandria, for example. There's Old Town Books. If you're looking for a good independent, go to bookshop.org, and that will steer you towards one, or you can actually buy your book on Bookshop and they'll ship it to you. How about that? It's kind of a counterweight to Amazon.
That's good.
And Amazon's going to come out fine out of this. I'm worried about our local bookstores.
Yeah. Garrett, you have given everyone who's participated today a book they can read and enjoy, or many books. If they go to your website, they could pick what aspect of DC history they want to delve into and use that to occupy themselves with a local beer that they've purchased from a local merchant during the month of July, when we won't be doing these weekly webinars. But I promise we will be back probably in August. And between now and then, we'll communicate about what online experiences we have brewing for the rest of 2020. Garrett, thank you so much. And I think we're going to have you back when we come back with more online experiences.
Yeah, twist my arm.
I will.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
But thanks everyone for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
Fantastic.
Bye-bye.
Be safe, everyone. Wear your mask. Wash your hands.
Amen.
Yeah.